Former United States Representative Richard Hastings once said, "We owe our World War II veterans, and all of our veterans, a debt that we can never repay." Madam Chair, judges, honored guests, and fellow cadets, veterans, the men and women that have fought in our wars and represented Canada abroad. They've fought for our freedom, the freedom of others, and for democracy. They've performed an invaluable service to their country. And a majority of veterans, after they finish their service, they're able to return home and resume their normal lives as though their service hadn't changed them. Although this is not the case in all situations. Take, for example, Canadian veteran Scott Smith. He enlisted in 2009 while Canada was still involved in the conflict in Afghanistan. He was in the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment. He served one tour in Afghanistan and then returned home to his wife and his 2 sons. But his tour had changed him. He was a shattered remnant of his former self. He started spending less time with his family and more time drinking, until after 2 years, in December of 2014, he took his own life. A quote from Phil Ralph of the Wounded Warriors group says, "This was somebody who was well respected, somebody who will be greatly missed." It is suspected that Corporal Smith suffered from PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a very common mental illness among veterans. Perhaps if the armed forces or the government had supported him, he would still be alive. Maybe his 2 sons would have a father. But no. His children will grow up without a dad because the government did not help Corporal Scott when he needed it. Losing a parent to suicide is not something that I would wish upon my worst enemy, let alone the children of a man who has served his country. He should have been cared for and treated properly by the government. But of course, this was not the case. He needed help, and he couldn't get it. And Canada does not even have the worst situation for veterans. For example, in 2013, the United States Department of Veteran Affairs published a study of veteran suicide rates. It showed that between 1999 and 2010, in the United States, 22 veterans committed suicide every single day for a span of 11 years. That is, on average, 1 every 65 minutes. And that's a huge understatement. Some larger states, such as Texas, California, Illinois, they didn't give the numbers of veteran suicide rates. So who does that leave out? It leaves out people like Levi Derby. He was a combat engineer that served in Afghanistan in the United States Army. During his deployment, he suffered a truly traumatic event. He offered a little girl a bottle of water. While the little girl came forward to accept the bottle of water, she stepped on a landmine that they had missed in a routine sweep. This haunted him for the rest of his life. When he returned home from his tour, he told his mother 2 things: that he would never kill again, and that he would not live to see his 27th birthday. He stayed locked in a motel for days with a vacant stare in his eyes. He attempted to have therapy, but the government just couldn't give him what he needed. They weren't equipped to provide what he needed to recover. He told a doctor, and I quote, he feared God would not let him into heaven, as he felt it was his fault for missing the landmine left behind by the Russians. He also suffered from PTSD for 5 years until on April 5th, in 2007, he also took his own life. A quote from the Fallen Heroes Project by Levi's mother says, "The war took my son from me. He left a proud and brave combat engineer, and he returned damaged, with a cold, dead stare in his eyes that was frightening to see." These horrific stories sicken me, and they make me realize that not only does our country need to improve its veteran care, but countries such as the United States, which spends more on its defense budget than the next top 20 countries combined. In fact, they spend 4% of their entire national budget just on veteran care. But it seems that they're more hell-bent on pumping money into a system that does not work than to improve the system of helping veterans. The government doesn't seem to care about the sacrifices these people have made. They've forgotten them, lest we forget the sacrifices that they've made.